I'm delighted to welcome you to Château de Pesteils. This ancient fortress was used to defend the whole valley because we had a lot of invaders in those days. The chateau is situated at an altitude of 700 meters, so it's a mountain chateau, so to say. The keep is 40 meters high. You'll see it later. The castle has been inhabited by 4 different families, but they've always been the same family. It has never been bought or sold, all 4 families by marriage. The chateau left the family simply for 80 years at the time of the Revolution. The chateau was taken as national property and bought back by my husband's great-grandfather a little later. So now let's talk about the architecture. As you can see, the chateau is made up of several different blocks. On each side, you'll find wings that were added in the 19th century. It was a colossal undertaking. Behind them, you can see the enormous 40-meter-high keep, the oldest part of the chateau. So now I invite you to follow along. We're going to go inside the chateau to see all the work that's been carried out in recent years. The tympanum you see here represents the alliance of 2 families, the Tessiers with the lozenges and the Montemas with the lions. We're now inside the chateau. This is the entrance hall. It was built in the 19th century. It was an old kitchen. In order to do this, we had to remove 2 floors of rooms that were above it in order to enlarge it outwards. In order to build this double revolution staircase, we had to dig into the rock to make room for it. And in this place you'll see that we really dug into the rock because you can see the rock behind it, as you can see here. This hall is very much in the neo-Gothic style. Here you can see a beautiful tapestry depicting Judith and Holofernes. But above all, the tapestry is amusing because it was found quite by chance in the coachman's sheds. It covered an old horse-drawn carriage as if it were an ordinary tapestry, when in fact it was a beautiful tapestry from the 16th century. Now I'll take you to the guard's room. This guard room is the oldest part of the chateau's main building. It was somewhat transformed in the 19th century because the addition of wings meant that openings had to be made. As you can see, the openings are in the Orientalist style, that's to say 19th century, and you can see the depth at the end of the chateau. Here there was a beautiful fireplace that we couldn't keep because we had to make 2 openings. The fireplace was moved to another private room in the chateau, which we'll show you later. And the woodwork was done by an architect from Aurillac, with the Miramon coat of arms, of course, because in the 19th century, people loved to put their coat of arms everywhere. We're now entering the Grand Salon. So, this salon was completely redone at the end of the 19th century because it's in a wing that was completely rebuilt. The work here was finished very late, in 1913, when the decoration was completed. And we can see it in these over-mantel paintings, which represent the Art Nouveau style. You can see the typical winding roots representing the 5 senses: touch, sight, taste, smell, and hearing. Underneath, there's a beautiful 15th century fireplace from a chateau called Château de Bronzac, an hour's drive from here, which belonged to the Pesteils family and is now a ruin. And this mantelpiece was brought back here likewise, at the end of the 19th century. So there are some beautiful paintings in this salon. There's the Dubouf portrait, who was Empress Eugénie's painter. She was also the painter of the great singer Rachel. Next to it, you can see this painting by Elizabeth Vigier-Lebrun. It's a rather sad story because the original painting was taken by one of my husband's first cousins, who, in despair at not inheriting Pesteils, took one of the most beautiful paintings in the salon. But this copy is still magnificent. Underneath, we've placed a few family portraits, simply to show that it's a living, breathing chateau. We celebrate our children's christenings in the chapel and marry our children here on a regular basis. The most recent marriage was that of my youngest son, who got married here 10 years ago. It seems like yesterday to me, but it's still 10 years ago. Turning to this little dais, we have two paintings by Carle van Loo in the background. Here, we have 3 wax figures given to us by the Musée d'Aurillac, which has closed, and which are wax figures from the Musée Grévin in Paris. They were given to us because they represented Lafayette, and the scene actually took place in Pesteils. I was given priority to inherit them. That's it, we're off to the second floor. The higher we go, the further back in time we go. Follow me up. Here you see the lions, very characteristic of the 19th century. This scene shows the inauguration of the Pesteils works. As we still do today, when we give a somewhat official reception, we have the prefect of the department, we have the Bishop of Saint-Flour, the architect Émile Lemaigre, who is the one who undertook all the work here, the Marquis de Miramon, and his wife, the Marquise de Miramon. On the panel next to it, perhaps you can see the scale of the work, which was colossal. Then, during the construction of these works, I read in a letter that the grandparents had put a little bit of gold in the foot of one of the constructions. And then I can tell you that all the children of all the generations, my children, my grandchildren, everyone gave absolutely frightening blows of pickaxe, but never found anything. The walls were very hard, fortunately. So here we have the remains of the painted ceilings of the 2 rooms that were subtracted, that were wiped out to make this enormous hall. Here, we find ourselves in one of 2 rooms that were redone in the 17th century and feature scenes, obviously from mythology. This one depicts Pheme with her hair transformed into snakes. In all 4 corners, we see the Demoiselles de Miramon, who could not marry because there were no suitors powerful enough for them, so they were made nuns, and the family created a convent in Vic-sur-Cère to house them. Behind it is a painting of Mademoiselle de Miramon, the sister of my husband's father, my father-in-law, who became a nun at a very young age. And here it represents her it was painted for her last ball. And this toilet, extraordinarily, I found pieces of it, including the fan, very recently in a trunk in storage. We'll move on to the other room with the painted ceilings. Here we also have a mythological scene. It's the unfortunate Icarus, who flew too close to the sun and crashed into the Aegean Sea. So we can place the time when these 2 rooms were redone. That's to say around 1608, because it was the time of an alliance between the Miramon family, whose coat of arms you can see up there, and the Sansac barons. So that's exactly the right time. Admire the beautiful frieze of flowers. This room has been completely remodeled. Because I had a film shoot about 15 years ago, and the director had a specialist in decorating from that period, and he wandered around Pesteils to collect objects and create a beautiful harmony. And it's true that the room has been totally transformed. Now we're going to step back in time again and attack the keep. We're about to enter the keep, and this footbridge was built in the 19th century. Until then, the keep was totally independent. It was not connected to the castle. The fortress of Polminhac has undergone several sieges, including a major one in 1425, which set fire to part of the main monument. Now we're in the keep, which was really used to gather the population and the guard in times of invasion. There must have been a trap door in some part of the floor, in the tiles, because underneath there's a room, a storeroom of sorts, in which provisions were kept. There are springs in Pesteils, so there was all the water you needed to feed and quench your thirst. This room was the Lord's chamber, and in those days it was used to house the population. The Lord had all his children, all his servants. It was very, very lived in. There are 2 15th century frescoes here. They posed a problem because we had them restored about 6 years ago because they were turning white. And there was a problem, which was that they had already been retouched in 1913, and they had been retouched in the style of that time, meaning with cartouches, you see very precise little flowers, and of course it was the taste of late 19th, early 20th century. So the question was, for the restoration, do we put them back in the 15th century style, or do we start again and restore the 19th century? Especially as these frescoes were represented at the French monument at the Trocadero in Paris. At the very top, there's a little star, and we discovered it. It's not much, but it was discovered during the latest works. This large fresco represents the 4 braves, because studies have shown that in the keep of the 14th and 15th centuries, the paintings always depicted braves. This is according to a fairly recent thesis. And on the other side, it's the master and his pupil. Now we're going to start climbing the keep, which is 40 meters high and has 100 or so steps. We're now on the first floor of the keep. It was a guard room, of course, but in the 19th century, it was turned into a chapel. So we were also lucky enough to have these circus characters enliven this chapel. We've baptized most of our grandchildren here. I have a son who made his communion here. Finally, it's used regularly. We still have the old prie-dieu from the church with the Marquis de Miramon. Here you see Marquis de Miramon. It's all from the Paul Mignac church. We find ourselves in one of the guard rooms, which had the particularity, in case of overload, to be able to put a ceiling on these pillars, which could be dismantled. Because as in the Lord's room, these were rooms where very, very many people crammed together. So here we've turned it into an archive room. So here's a picture of the family genealogy. We're over there. This is my children's corner, my husband's corner, my corner. And as you can see, I'm Breton. There's not even my name. Oh yes, but it's faded. And then above, you see photos of chateaux. This is Château de Pesteils, the only one left in the family. Next to it is Château de Pauillac, which was sold some 15 years ago. It's 100 kilometers from here, near Brioude. Château de Fargues, which I understand the family left about 60 years ago. The chateaux on this side were the possessions of the Yvonne de Miramon family in Rouergue, because the family comes from Rouergue, but emigrated to Cantal in 1608 or thereabouts, by his marriage to a Pesteils, a demoiselle de Pesteils. And as I said earlier, the four families succeeded each other, but it was by marriage and not by sale. So here we have some letters, and also you can see some manuscripts. You can see the signatures of all the great kings. And then, next to it, King Louis XV erected the Marquisate of Cassagne de Beaufort on the land of Pesteils. In other words, the title of Marquis belongs to the Château de Pesteils. We have the papers. Well, various small ones, passports, decks of cards, assignats. But my husband's grandfather in 1933 left this rather beautiful piece of writing, which I'll show you. I'm showing it to you because it's quite a nice piece of advice for us. Now we're going to go up another floor to see the eternal return room. So we made the eternal return room because during the war in 1943, and the filming of this cult classic took place. The actors were Jean Marais, Madeleine Sologne, Delanoy for the conversations, Well for the script, and Jean Cocteau for the direction. And here we have letters from each of these actors thanking us for the shoot, for having welcomed them to Pesteils. Unfortunately, we don't have much to say about this shooting, which took place in the middle of the war, because we weren't born and there's no one from that period who can tell us about it, so we don't know anything about it. So now we're going to take you to another floor, the Chemin de Ronde, and there, with a beautiful view of the whole panorama, the Cantal mountains, the Cantalian countryside, the river La Cère, because this castle was built to protect this valley. So now we move on to the kitchen, which was created in 1900 and served until 1995. We move on to the service area, and here's the freight elevator, which was built in 1900 or 1890, I'm not sure, and is still in use every day. As you can see, it's not as light as it looks, but it gives us exercise and we use it all the time. The visitors are very intrigued and tell me to electrify it. So now we're moving on to this big, beautiful kitchen. We've redone it in exactly the same way as it's been since 1900. And we've won the 2002 La Cornue Award, which is the prize for the most beautiful kitchen of the year. Here you can see a cantu, a Cantalian specialty, with these two little wooden benches used to store salt. This is the place of grandmothers. Two figures, always wax figures, whom we've dressed, as you can see, with liveries we found here in the storerooms. And here you can admire the livery buttons representing the Miramon and great-grandmother coats of arms, named Rouget. So here you still have the old stove, which was still in use 15 years ago. You can see the pipes leading up to the water tank, which provided water for the first floor. A little further on, you can see the bells, which were used to call the servants. You can see all the rooms on this box. And at this point, you can see the souillard, which was used for washing dishes, cutting up poultry and meats. In other words, for anything that was a little dirty. So this is the souillard. The character polishes the brass. So now I'm going to take you to a private area, which is our dining room and living room, where we have our daily get-togethers. So we're going through this little door, which used to be the serving hatch, because when we used to entertain in this dining room, even if there were two people, there would be one person at the stove, one person in front of the serving hatch on this side, and one person on the other side of the serving hatch who could finally serve. This is our daily room, which is still a bit of a mess, of course, but we're delighted to present it to you because it's not open to the public. So here you can see that it's done in the neo-Gothic style, absolutely pure. The furniture was made in Aurillac and commissioned for Pesteils. The mantelpiece was a very fine one that came from the guardroom, but was moved here because it needed large space to install it. And it was covered in plaster in the 19th century style, because it was always necessary, of course, to have one's coat of arms and all the attributes of one's nobility everywhere. That was a feature of the 19th century. Anyway, it's been a pleasure explaining Pesteils to you. I hope you enjoyed it, that you had a good time, and that it will make you want to come here, and it will be a pleasure to welcome you.